Well, hello, Forest Meadow. I want to welcome you back to another episode of Sermon Reflections. This is the time that we've kind of devoted to just spending a few minutes looking at some of the content from the Sunday service. And by the way, just as a reminder, we talked about this last week, but if you regularly watch these videos and you would like to discuss some of these questions with a group of people rather than just thinking about them on your own, then you can let me know, or you can let Dave Beutler know. Dave actually goes through all of these questions with a group of people on Wednesday evening over Zoom. So if you're interested in that, just give me a heads up and we'll try to get that worked out. Let's go ahead and reflect upon some of the things we learned in Matthew chapter 17 as Jesus is transfigured. Now, starting off, I just want to confess that as I read through this passage, I was initially confused as to the point of the passage. In other words, I was asking myself questions like, why is this passage here? And what am I supposed to learn from it? What is the purpose of Jesus glowing? And why is it necessary? But you know what? When I think the Lord revealed this, wow, what a beautiful passage this is. And how necessary it was for Peter, James, and John to witness this incredible event. You know, they were supposed to witness Jesus in his glory. And they were not supposed to share this story with anyone else, at least not until Jesus had risen from the dead. Others were not supposed to know of the hidden glory of Jesus, the Messiah. And I think there's a reason for that. You know, it's very easy to externally follow Jesus when the glory is very evident, but it's difficult whenever the glory is concealed. Now, Jesus is glorious, no doubt about that. They saw his true form, or at least some of it. But that glory was hidden in earthen vessels, in clay pots, in his flesh, so that those who seek him would find him. And you know, it's just like the kingdom starts small like a mustard seed and it grows. And similar to that, Jesus' incarnation, it starts with humility as a baby, as a human baby, and glory follows. You know, these disciples, they were there to witness his glory. And there were three witnesses so that their testimony would be received by the rest of the Jews. And then they had the job of sharing this glory, the story of what they saw of the glorified Messiah with the rest of the world. And not only did they see the glorified Messiah, but they also heard the Father say that Jesus was his beloved Son and was pleased with him, is pleased with him. And they heard it from the Father himself, that Jesus is the one whom he sent. And they could never go back and question this event. It wasn't just man telling them, this was God himself. And when the Father spoke, they hit the floor with their faces to the ground and were struck with terror. There was really no questioning that Jesus was the Messiah, the promised one, the anointed one, the Lion from the tribe of Judah. But this time he came as a lamb, still a conquering lamb who would destroy the works of the devil. You can see that in 1 John chapter 3 verse 8. But he still came as a lamb. But the next time it seems that he leads with glory and with power. And you can see the last few chapters of Revelation for that. So, the Father, Moses, and Elijah are all there to testify of who Jesus was and is. Jesus' glory, on the other hand, is there to reveal who he was. And then the disciples are there to testify of who Jesus was and is to the rest of the world. But we must listen to him. He says, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. And it kind of has some notes of the Shema. In Deuteronomy 6:4, he says, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. Hear, the Lord our God, the Lord he is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your sons, and talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down. In other words, these things are supposed to be incorporated to all of your life, every aspect of your life. When you rise up, You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates, everywhere. In other words, these commands need to saturate into you. And now Jesus is the one issuing the commands of God. He is the prophet like Moses, and we are supposed to listen to Jesus. Just as we listened to Moses, we are now supposed to listen to Jesus, learning his commands, teaching them to our families, fixing them in our hearts and in our minds. In other words, our responsibility now as believers is to do the same thing the disciples did. They testified of the glory of the Lord Jesus. And it makes me just pause for a minute and ask myself, am I testifying of his greatness and his splendor and his majesty and might and glory? And, one way we can do this is not necessarily intuitive, but it's by singing. Last week we talked about singing hymns and how husbands and fathers ought to lead their families in worship. But I want us to consider when we are singing these hymns, these great hymns that testify of the greatness of God, of his faithfulness, of his mercies and righteousness, what are we doing? We are proclaiming, as Acts 2 says, the mighty deeds of God. These are helpful tools to help us teach our children of the glories of Jesus, the Messiah. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our questions for this week. Our first question is this. Why did Jesus bring James, John, and Peter to the mountain? Why only them, and why did he bring them to a mountain? Number 2, what does it mean that Moses and Elijah were there? And what should the 3 apostles learn from this? Number 3, why Moses and Elijah and not other prophets? Number 4, when does Jesus have this kind of appearance again? And why does he have this appearance again? Number 5, how does this event compare with Jesus' baptism, and how is it different? Number 6, how did the apostles recognize Moses and Elijah? That's an interesting question. Number 7, did the apostles have trouble listening to Jesus, and why? Number 8, was all the affirmation given to them sufficient, and why or why not? Number 9, why did Peter want to build tents or tabernacles, and was this what Jesus had intended? Number 10, why did Jesus want to keep this event a secret? And would it have been believed at the time had they shared it? And finally, number 11, what did Jesus do that made all of this believable? And why only that one thing? And how is it unique in comparison with all of the other events of history? Well, that's about all of the time that we have for this week. Just as a quick teaser for this next week, we're going to be looking at the following passage, which talks about Jesus healing someone, and the disciples saying, "Why couldn't we do this?" And he says, "Because of the littleness of your faith. I say to you, if you believe, you have the faith of a mustard seed, and you say to this mountain, be lifted up and move over here, then it would happen." And so we're going to talk about that passage this next week. And so we invite you to come and to join us. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your desire to dig deeper into the scriptures. We hope that you have a great day. Thanks.